Okay, it looks like we're just starting to get going here on the streams, guys. Bum, bum, bum. What was I going to sing? There was a song I was going to sing at the beginning. Okay, well, we're live, I do believe. Let me just double check on everything. It's Wednesday, November 15th, 2023. Oh, yeah, Nick, it's the other one. Can you switch to the other one? 9:08 a.m. U.S. Pacific Daylight Time here in Los Angeles. And I have with me Stardust. Stardust streams on YouTube and tweets from Star on Twitter. You can follow her on there, and she's on multiple platforms. Stardust, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, thank you.
We're going to be talking about her documentary called Unmasked, the far left's mastery of dehumanization. And it's a part 1, 25-minute little documentary that she came out with that caught my interest. So I'm like, I've debated her a number of times on Modern Day Debate and maybe Hippy Dippy Roundtable. Maybe you were on like a Cozy or Kill Stream or something over
yeah, I think
time.
Yeah. We've had a couple of debates, definitely on Modern Day Debates is what I remember for sure.
Yeah. I remember we touched on the Derek Chauvin, George Floyd incident, which that may not have even been the topic of the debate. And
we may have touched on it briefly. Yeah.
And is the Great Reset real? One of those debates. So it's been cool. Weird sound, say the people in the chat. Just a heads up, guys. So, and we will be taking your calls, guys, if you would like to call in. The, Hake, your audio is bad, says GMD Jim. Audio sounds underwater, says Sean. Okay. Audio sounds ghetto. We will be addressing that. We'll fix it, guys. Complicated business. Fixing things in the studio.
It happens.
Yeah. It will be about, yes, I'm reading the chat. Jib jab, thank you. It will be about the leftists who are taking the side of the Palestinians, but against the Israelis. And there's no need for that. Or ignoring the evil done to the Israelis. There's evil on many sides, of course.
Yeah.
Sounds like a froggy, says Charlie Church. Yeah, okay, I understand. I like the audio, says FYM. Well, then we will go with it. Well, can we just play the intro music while he gets this thing going, Hasan? So anyway, guys, you guys can call in and talk with, chime in on this. We will be talking about the Israel-Palestine situation and the drama unfolding here in America and around the world with that stuff. But anyway, guys, let's get right on with the show! 1, 2, 3, 4.
Oh, it's the Hake Report, the Hake Report, la la la. Oh, it's the Hake Report, the Hake Report, la la la.
Hey, guys!
Oh, it's the Hake Report, the Hake Report. Oh, it's the Hake Report, the Hake Report, la la la.
So, how you guys doing? I am fine. Yes, I understand. I just listened to the audio over on Odyssey. I'm live on multiple platforms, and it does sound like real audio player. Real audio player from the year 2000, where it's all warped and warbled and garbled and stuff like that.
Well, we've got a vintage effect today. So.
Yeah. I have my the Hake Report La 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 t-shirt on, and I have my guest with me. So let's introduce, are you able to put her on screen too?
Not able to do that right now.
Not able to do that? Are you able to do like a switch view thing? Okay. We'll just go forward. Welcome to the show, Stardust. I've debated Stardust many times. Various topics, modern day debate, maybe hippy dippy, Killstream, maybe Cozy. A liberal gal.
Yes.
Where are you from? Are you from America, Pakistan? Where?
Yeah, so I was born and raised in America. My family is from India originally. And we're basically like Muslim Indian background, so yeah,
Okay.
kind of
And I've debated her many times, even-tempered young lady. Sometimes I felt like I'm boring her because she's so it doesn't overreact, which is cool.
yeah. Yeah.
Again, Stardust streams on YouTube, tweets from Star on X and other platforms, Twitch, even Kick. She's even on Kick, I found. So the main topic I want to talk about today is Stardust. And you guys can call in 1-888-775-3773. We are going to show video. We just have to get the audio worked out and all these different things. But I came across your video, your documentary video. I call it a documentary. I don't know if you consider it that. You called it a video essay.
Yeah, I feel weird even calling it a video essay because it's like my first type of video in this format.
Yeah.
But you know, I'm open to all interpretations of what people think it is. So.
It's what caught my attention too, is because it was organized, well done, well produced. It's called Unmasked, guys, the far left's mastery of dehumanization. And it showed, well, your tweet about it caught my attention. It showed Hasan Piker at Hasan, who's a liberal guy, sort of a communist. He's called Woke Bay. He's been on The Fallen State with Jesse Lee Peterson. This
Has he?
cousin or nephew of Cenk Uygur of the Young
Yes,
Turks.
he's the nephew.
And he's maybe like the #1 guy on Twitch. He was censored for a bit for using the C word for white people, but he's very popular. He gets thousands of people watching his show, Young Guy. And he was
Thousands. Yeah.
denying that that Hamas was using Palestinians for human shields. And then he said, even if they were doing it, it doesn't justify the Israelis shooting rockets through the human shields or shooting through the human shield people at the Hamas people. And
You know what really stuck out about that clip to me is that it seems like he just fundamentally doesn't understand what human shield means. I don't know if you picked that up from that clip. But.
Sort of, yeah, because the Hamas people, according to reports, and I don't know what the truth is, I haven't followed this whole Israel-Hamas war or ongoing conflict situation very closely. I know that there's been brutality on many sides. I mean, I would assume, it would just make sense that there have been evil people doing evil things to one another between those two groups. And that Hamas holes up sometimes maybe in hospitals, allegedly. Don't know. Or they, I think you showed video of one Hamas fighter saying Allahu Akbar and having his gun and then having a hostage woman right next to her. And that would make people pause to shoot at him.
Yeah. So essentially what they do is apparently they have like a tunnel system underneath the city. And they do have like tunnels underneath hospitals as well where they set up bases. This is all like developing information that's coming out, and you can't really tell when there's like an ongoing like war/conflict of that type because all of the information coming out is changing rapidly. But essentially that's kind of like what we've learned is that they operate in civilian clothes. They don't have specific buildings that they operate out of like the United States does when they have like federal employees or like combatants, right? Combatants are usually very clearly marked. And yeah, it's just they operate out of civilian centers, so maybe they'll be in a building where they are doing one thing on one floor and then people have an office on another. And they're not good to their own people either.
Yeah, you showed. Well, explain what you showed footage of Palestinians protesting against Hamas, the leadership, and you showed headlines where Hamas cracked down on the people who did their protest against them. And so Hamas, like you said, is not good to their own people. And yet these people think, oh, I'm pro-Palestinian. That means, yes, I'm pro-Hamas. And these people are the far left. Explain what you saw on October 7th without being too graphic. Because October 7th, that was when Hamas went in and did their surprise attack, as it was called, on the Israelis.
So essentially what I saw is I woke up that morning and the first thing I saw was just graphic videos that Hamas operatives themselves had posted to social media. They were posting it to Telegram. They were posting it to people's Facebooks. Essentially, they were like, executing people or just torturing people in the most brutal ways possible and just posting it for everybody to see. And I think one of the most heinous parts of that is that they didn't just do this in such a brutal way. A lot of the time, they would send these images or videos to family members. So, like, for one example, one girl found out her grandmother was, basically passed away as a result of this because, or was killed really, because she saw it being live streamed on her grandmother's private Facebook page. So, we can have plenty of criticisms of the Israeli government. We can have plenty of criticisms of, like, combatants right now. But I think that, there was a unique type of psychological terror that was inflicted upon these people, not just like the loss of human life, but, after their, the Jewish people's history, there is a collective paranoia, and it's understandable. And then them being psychologically terrorized like this, it's just, I can't even imagine. I feel like I'll never forget the images I saw that morning, and I can't even imagine what it's like for somebody who has family who found out via social media or via text message or via, images sent to them by terrorists.
I was fortunate. I'm not on social media on like Saturdays or Sundays at all, really. And so I was spared watching any of this stuff. And I liked watching your video on this because you were good about keeping it family friendly, if you will. Like, you showed hints of the evil things that they were doing. You mentioned that case of the grandmother. This Hamas guy allegedly, like, took the grandmother's phone and uploaded video of the grandmother being killed or whatever to her private Facebook page using her own phone. And the woman being, the granddaughter being interviewed about that. And you showed different things, and you even, like, censored the word killed and dead and all that stuff, which was nice because it's child friendly, it's YouTube friendly, it's not going to get age restricted. So I appreciated that because it presented what happened without being nasty and overly graphic and all that stuff about it. And so I missed what happened. I missed a lot of that propaganda stuff. It reminds me of the ISIS videos where they're promoting the brutality, their own brutality, and then having, like, awesome music come in to invite people to who are also filled with this hatred and identity to join the ISIS team. And apparently, like, there are people in the so-called West, from popular former porn stars to people like whom you mentioned. I don't know if they didn't watch the videos or if they saw some of it and thought some of it couldn't be real or propaganda. Go ahead.
I'm not really sure. That's what I thought as well at first. Like, maybe they didn't see all of the graphic images and videos that I saw. But I also talked to some friends and they said, no, some of these people saw it. they just don't care. They think either that this has been happening to other people, so, what's the big deal with this, with this happening, or they just don't care because of this idea that the Israelis are basically deserving of it because, they've done such wrongs to the Palestinian people, which is just not really true, right? Yes, the Israeli government and their policies have done a lot of wrong to the Palestinians, and there could be improvements there. But the average Israeli person, even the average Israeli IDF soldier, conscription is required. And so men and women are conscripted. And the average person there has no tie to the origins of Israel starting, has no real tie to the Nakba, these are people who were born and raised in Israel, and they don't really know anything else.
Is it true that
Yeah.
I've heard from right-wingers that the Israelis, some of the IDF soldiers have T-shirts of 1 shot, 2 kills, sort of bragging about shooting pregnant Palestinians or shooting through civilians to get Hamas?
It's possible, but I haven't seen it myself, so I would have to look into it. For
I mean,
sure.
I wouldn't doubt that there's this callousness and hatred on both sides for each other. I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, absolutely, there is definitely.
You are pro-Palestinian, but you made the point that we need to take up for the Jewish people because they're the ones who have been speaking up against the anti-Semitism here in America, or anti-Islamophobia, you called it, here in America.
Yeah, they have been, and also, it is a group of people who historically have been persecuted. And so when they started migrating to Israel, they started migrating to Israel prior to World War I even. And then a large portion of their population eventually ended up being refugees because of World War II, because a lot of Holocaust survivors were sitting in camps for about 4 years after the Holocaust. And they would try to return to their homes and they would encounter violence. So a lot of them ended up migrating to Israel. And then you had the expulsion of Jewish people from Arab states as well that ended up migrating to Israel as well. So it's not a clear cut, colonizer colonized kind of narrative here.
Right.
So.
That's partly why the leftists whom you point out in this documentary are for the decolonization, they call it. A victim group versus a blame group. The colonizer against the colonized, and they take the side of the colonized. Capitalism versus anti-capitalism. It's all these taking sides, racist versus anti-racist. I think that I see this as good versus evil. And each person is capable of evil. So whatever side you're on, you're quite capable of being evil in this situation. And it seems like most people are falling into that.
Yeah, and just to be clear, just because they're refugees doesn't mean that they're not capable of doing wrong things, or that they're not capable of hurting the local population, right? It's very clear that is something that is possible and has been done. But the colonizer colonized narrative, it doesn't really make sense. I think that there are more nuanced critiques that people can have without being without honestly just boiling these people down to purely being colonizers. I feel is in a sense kind of dehumanizing,
right?
Because it doesn't really fully fit, and it kind of ignores their collective paranoia and their reasons for that collective paranoia. So
you talked about how they are dehumanizing them, and calling them colonizers is kind of dehumanizing them in itself. because we heard one of the people in your video say it doesn't matter if these are civilians. There are no civilian people in this area because it's a military occupation. And it reminds me of the justification that we saw after Trump came in office, I guess Inauguration Day. What's that guy's name? Richard Spencer got punched in the side of his head. And everybody was talking about punch Nazis. Yes, you can punch Nazis. Richard Spencer is sort of a nationalist, socialist type of a guy. And so that sort of reminds me of the dehumanization of people. Calling people racist means you're justified in committing violence against them. And that's not justified just by what they're into, in my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, like, you know, there are, again, critiques you can have of people that you feel are being bigoted or being racist without, like, justifying, like, outright violence to them. I feel like it just sets a dangerous precedent. I think there are just, like, way better things that you can do rather than justifying violence towards people.
Yeah. I think that the left have a problem with, or they have a big time, let's call it taking up for victims thing that they're into, which I would assume kind of includes you as a liberal, like you're pro-Palestinian, but you're also for decency to everybody. But I say that emotional people they are unjust in their mindset. I think that's why in America there is disproportionate violence from the black Americans. And I think that a big part of that is because they're fed a victim narrative from a very young age. And when they're fed this notion that they're victims, it just breeds resentment and justification for victimizing. Victims become perpetrators very often. So I have a feeling that that's what's happening with many of the Palestinian people, that they're fed this resentment. What do you say to that?
So what I would say is that I think with like black people in America, I think it's like it's a very complicated issue, I think. You know, I do think that there is a correlation between like lead poisoning and you know, eventual adulthood violence. There have, you know, and talk to any medical professional, even the most trace amounts of lead. And you'll see this like within poverty-stricken communities. Even the most trace amounts of lead can lead to problems later on in life, behavioral problems. But also, you know, like poverty, historical poverty will also lead to violence. Not that violence is ever justified, right? And obviously, you know, you want to empower people to be able to rise above what their circumstances are, right? Like there's no excuse for violence ever, right? But I do think it's a very complicated issue. But I think you're right in some sense. You know, some people view themselves as victims, and some people justify their actions through that way.
Yeah.
And you'll see that across the board, right? So you know, Palestinians. So the Hamas. It's complicated even with the Palestinians, right? Because they are, you know, they are anti-Semitic, a lot of them. But at the same time, a lot of them have been fed Hamas propaganda from a very young age.
Right.
They have, they used to have this show, I think, Pioneers of Tomorrow. And it was a children's TV show, and it featured like a Mickey Mouse like character. And it's the most absurd thing I've ever seen. But essentially, in this TV show, this Mickey Mouse like character basically gets martyred. And in this TV show, and they show this Mickey Mouse character getting beaten up by like this Israeli officer, and then like and then eventually he passes away, and it's like it's a whole thing. So on one end, they've been fed propaganda. On the other end, you know, they feel like they had land taken from them, right? And in some sense, they did, right? You know, the Nakba was, you know, historical, you know, situation where a lot of them were forced from their homes. But there has been a long history of violence on both sides, and it's just so complicated, really. So, and again, I'm not an expert on any of this, but just from what I've read, it's just such a complicated situation. So,
Yeah. I think that the people who are prone to feel sorry for others are not doing them a service by feeling sorry for them. Like, you can stand for justice without being caught up in, oh, poor you, oh, these people are evil type of thing, because then you clamp down overly on one group, the blame group, and then you cater to the emotions of the victim group. I think it's a disservice that the world has done by, I think, meddling in these affairs has made things worse oftentimes. You know, you brought up, or no, the people in your video brought up apartheid. They accuse Israel of being an apartheid state, which may be true. I mean, they are for the Jews in particular, which, in my opinion, they want to set up their country like that. They have a right to do that. I think all countries have a right to set up their country as they want it to be. But the swooping in and saving and meddling and trying to create peace has created more discord, I think.
In a sense, yeah. I think it's a bit complicated with the apartheid stance, because on, you know, technically, I think there is definitely like an argument there to be made that it is an apartheid state. But at the same time, like, so if we're just looking at Israel proper, we're not looking at Gaza, we're not looking at the West Bank. Israel proper, about 20% of their population are Arab Muslims. And for the most part, they tend to share all the same rights, with the exception of like a couple of laws, I believe. At the same time, they're not conscripted. They're not conscripted the same way that a lot of other people within the Israeli population are. Like all of the Jewish population, with the exception of the Orthodox Jews, are conscripted
To the military.
Yeah, to the military. Yeah. And there are also some ways, like I have a friend who is, you know, was born in Israel, and she talks about how there are some ways that, like, as a Israeli woman, she has less rights than like an Arab Israeli man. And you know, that also is true, right? But also, I think the comparison to South Africa is not really like, it's not that extreme. I would say. I think that you know, we can like advocate for changes to happen within Israel, but also we have to acknowledge, like, there are not very many Jews in any other part of the Middle East, right? The fact that Israel is made up 20% of Arab Muslims is pretty significant to me. So
Yeah, I've heard that if the Palestinians were to be put into Israel, then the Palestinians would outnumber the Israelis. So then the Israelis would be a minority in their country.
yeah, I don't think that's really like, to me, I'm not really concerned about that. I just don't think a one-state solution is doable, just because of the animosity on both sides.
Right.
Yeah, I don't think that it's a possibility. So.
I personally don't like this this meddling that the outsiders do. The UN wants to come in. I get that they want to help the people who are innocent, but it's oftentimes causing more problems by swooping in my opinion. And the EU and the American government giving money to both sides, it seems like a corrupting influence oftentimes. And, different countries sending their troops or sending military equipment and funding to these countries, be it Ukraine, Russia, be it whatever, this situation. I feel like it isn't necessary. Like, I think the two can hash it out on on their own without you helping people kill each other. Am I wrong about that?
Sure. So I understand your perspective. I personally have the opposite perspective. I think that because America is essentially like somebody else said it like this, but essentially we like saved a lot of the world in World War II just by getting involved. And I think anytime that one of my friends who studies history a lot said this to me, you know, anytime that America practices isolationist policies, inevitably, whatever conflict is going on in the world comes knocking upon our door. So it is, in a sense, you know, better to be proactive, better to be involved, especially since we're like the number one provider of global aid. We're one of the big influences in the world. And I think that I just think that America also is morally superior to most other countries. I think because we're morally superior that, you know, I do think that it sounds terrible, but I think we should kind of like keep people in check.
Maybe my criticism then is for us to do it in wiser ways, because although we're morally superior, I think we're morally messed up still. And so we're just the top of the dung pile in terms of morals, which doesn't mean that we're bringing anybody up. We're just all kind of tumbling down into evil, it seems like.
I mean, it's possible. I do think that, you know, we can acknowledge that like America morally might be the best, but still has a lot of work to do. And so, you know, we can certainly be wiser about the way that we involve ourselves in things. We can be wiser about the way that we advise Israel on the way that they go into Gaza, right? We could be wiser in all of those categories and have our allies learn from our mistakes, right? But yeah.
Last quick point about this foreign dealings thing. I remember when I was pretty young, there was all this propaganda, if you will. You can call it true propaganda, but I don't necessarily consider the full truth propaganda against apartheid in South Africa. And they ended apartheid in South Africa, which you mentioned it's more extreme than the situation in Israel. And I've heard stuff that sounds, I don't know, it sounds foreign to me. But, you know, about the segregation and the different treatment that different people got, and that whites were a minority ruling over the majority of the other groups in South Africa. But now that apartheid has ended, and it's been some decades since apartheid has ended, it feels like it's been replaced by something worse. And I've seen black South Africans admit this, saying at least when the whites were running our country, we had a functioning country, we had jobs, and now it's like these militant, white-hating black communists running the country into the ground. They're losing, I remember years ago they were losing water in Cape Town, like they were having a water crisis in Cape Town and stuff. So they're worse off. After us getting rid of apartheid, it's been replaced with something worse in the end. Well, at this point.
Yeah, so what I would say is, you know, I'm not completely educated on the South Africa apartheid, but what I will say is I think that probably these two things are probably two different issues, right? I think just morally, you know, being opposed to apartheid is probably the right position, you know, just because it's like an unequal distribution of rights. It's, you know, it also caused the forced separation of families within South Africa. Because a lot of Black South Africans were relocated to like designated areas, and it ended up fragmenting their communities. There was like, you know, and also, you know, I think you and I both share that nobody should be discriminated against because of their skin color, right? And there was a decent amount of racial discrimination as well as segregation. So I can't really speak to like the modern issues in South Africa. I'm not super well versed in it, but just like from a moral principle, I do think that like being opposed to apartheid is probably the morally correct position. So
Yeah, we should definitely be opposed to the black communists who are like hating the white South African farmers nowadays. It's a bad situation, I think.
yeah, if that's true, if that's true, definitely that, that's not right. Any hatred based on race is not right, whether that's hatred based on black or hatred based towards white people, right? So
I don't know that I entirely agree about you should never discriminate based on skin color or race or whatever. I mean, you should treat people fairly, but if a locale wants to set up their community to be blacks only or whites only or whatever, or majority whatever. Israel, for example, majority Jewish. They want to stay majority Jewish. I think that a locale or even a country should be allowed to do that and not have the internationalists meddling quite so much. Because you can cast any setup as unjust. Like the communists set up capitalism as inherently unjust, but there's a right and wrong way to do capitalism, a just and an unjust way to do capitalism. It's not inherently unjust. So I think there's a right and wrong way to discriminate, because there's like people naturally discriminate interpersonally, and they should have the right to do that.
I think that I think that there's no problem with sorry, I feel a sneeze coming on.
Okay.
Sorry. And I think it's gone now. I think that there's no problem. Like, let's say you want to maintain a certain type of culture within a specific community, right? I don't think there's a problem with that. But I do think that like discriminating based on race alone is not really the way to do it, right? Like if you want to foster a type of culture within a community, maybe like looking at the people individually that you're letting into that community and seeing how willing they are to integrate into that community, even if their values don't necessarily align at the present moment. If they're willing to change those values, if they're willing to adapt and change with that, or even if maybe they're coming in because they don't like the existing values that they're currently living under, right? Like you'll see one of the biggest vocal anti-Hamas people have been like Iranian immigrants within North America and even in the UK. Iranian immigrants, a lot of them fled Iran because they didn't like the values that they were forced to live under. And so they see that Iran is backing Hamas, and they're completely against it. So
you just brought up Iran, and you in your video, this video that we're talking about, the Unmasked, the far left's mastery of dehumanization, you said that Iran supports Hamas and Hezbollah and these reportedly terrorist organizations that are attacking Israelis right now. And Iran, I've heard that some of the Iran top people have said, oh, Israel is the little Satan and America is the big Satan. And inside of Iran, they have this this feminist group movement happening, if you will. The women, I know about it because I'm seeing billboards here in Los Angeles. Or I've seen them over the past year or year and a half. I stand with Iranian women, because some of them don't want to wear the hijab, and I guess allegedly, or is it confirmed, 2 Iranian women have been,
Yes, it's been
young women
confirmed.
have been beaten to death, allegedly. Well, I say
Yeah,
allegedly.
it's been confirmed. Yeah. But so it has been confirmed. The first one was Masa Amini. She was 22. She was wearing a hijab, but it wasn't up to like the standards of the moral police there. And what ended up happening is that she was beaten very severely and ended up dying in the hospital afterwards as a result of that beating. And then most recently, about a month ago, there was a 16-year-old girl who wasn't wearing a hijab who was also beaten to death by the morality police. And so, I just find it kind of ironic that, not all far left are supporting Hamas, right? But it does seem like there were a decent amount of far left people that were justifying the actions of Hamas. And to me, I just can't even fathom that, because to me, as a feminist, I look at Iran and I see the way that they treat women there, and I just can't ever be behind that. And also looking at the Iranian people who fled Iran after the Ayatollah, basically took over, basically the religious extremists in that country took over. So,
I instinctively go against what I feel to be trendy. And it's been trendy in America to be, I stand with the Iranian women. It reminded me of the hashtag Bring Back Our Girls thing that was popular toward the end of the Obama administration when Boko Haram kidnapped Nigerian schoolgirls. It just feels like these liberals who I largely almost always disagree with, standing up against these people doing something over there. And it sounds like, based on what you told me, that the Iranian morality police did evil to these young ladies. I don't know what the situation was, but it sounds wrong. But now I feel like it's evil versus evil, because it reminds me just of the anti-apartheid push in South Africa. They're acting like South Africa is this wonderful country, and it's in a mess right now. And so I'm concerned about if they get sway in Iran, they're gonna may do away with this one evil thing over there, but they're gonna replace it with something also evil and destructive. Didn't Iran used to be somewhat modern?
It was pretty modern if you look at the pictures from the 70s.
Yeah.
It's possible, but I think extremism of like any type is bad, right? And just because just because something is trendy doesn't necessarily mean that it's wrong, right? There are times when people will make things trendy, and it's really like a very, very shallow understanding of the situation.
Yeah.
But I think I understand your concerns about it, right? If there's like a power vacuum in any place, like the tendency is that you get like kind of nefarious forces filling that power vacuum.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like I don't know. I just feel that nobody should be beaten to death over a head covering. In my opinion, that just seems like such a fundamental violation of human rights.
Yeah, if that's the whole story, that's crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't imagine what would justify what happened to her, but it's wild. You brought up the power vacuum thing. Under the Obama administration, Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State, I think, is that when she took out Gaddafi in like Libya? And
I'd have to look into that. I to be completely honest with you, I'm not fully expert on geopolitics.
No problem. I mean, I just feel like one of my co-hosts, my sometimes co-hosts, Big Bump, told me that Gaddafi said, if you kill me, Europe is going to turn brown. And he was saying that basically like there would be a flow of refugees to Europe because Gaddafi was keeping things, even though he may have been evil, I don't know, dictator or something like that, he was keeping things somewhat in check. And I heard the same thing maybe of Saddam Hussein, but I don't know. So we take out these bad guys and it creates more mess. But anyway, so if you don't know much about that, or you don't, do you have any commentary on that before we move forward?
I can't really say much about it. You know, I get that people are concerned because it seems that there are a large group of people within society, within our societies nowadays, whose values don't like really align up with ours. I totally understand that. I think you know, it does take a couple of generations for children from more like you know, whose families come from different values to kind of assimilate within that country, right? But it does happen over generations. For me, it was instantaneous, and for my family, it was instantaneous. But I do have hope that a lot of people who don't have the same values will, you know, their lineage will eventually end up kind of integrating with the broader society.
Wow. So, that's very hopeful of you. I don't see it that way. Like I see, like in America, we were a largely white Christian country, quite conservative, I think. Like 100 years ago, this like Henry Ford and these other guys, it seemed like it was more common for the general people to speak against the Jewish people. Like they were called nowadays, people look back on Walt Disney and Henry Ford and call them anti-Semitic. And I don't know what they were about. I wasn't around back then. But it just seemed like the culture has changed in a whole lot of ways in terms of people didn't used to have to lock their doors in their neighborhoods. Nowadays, people do. The crime, the notion of the freedom of speech has gone down. The notion of the freedom of the Second Amendment has gone down. I don't think it's deniable to say that our value, like the values of the people has changed, not just with immigration, of course, but with like, so it's not just immigration, but it is immigration too. But it's also, of course, you know, the education system was seemingly infiltrated by some liberal, if you will, influences. So go ahead.
Yeah, so I think you know, over time you'll see like values within any society change, right? And you'll see things go back and forth, you'll see things wax and wane. But I do think like as far as like the anti-Semitism goes, I'm glad that we're like less of an anti-Semitic society. You know, the fact is that like when the Holocaust ended, most of the world was still incredibly anti-Semitic, to the point that a lot of the Holocaust refugees were still sitting in those camps for years afterwards.
They didn't want them, huh?
Yeah, they didn't, or you know, if they tried to return, they would again encounter violence from the people there. And so I do think it's better that we're less bigoted, we're less you know, anti-Semitic.
Do you think that's true though? Do you think like do you think that they were violently evil towards the Jews back then?
Yeah, I think
because
there's
definitely a lot of violence and hatred towards Jews today from all kinds of groups in America.
Yes, there certainly is. There certainly is, but I think it was probably more so.
Really?
Back then, yeah, I think so. Overall, if you look at like, I do believe that there are statistics on like worldwide crime stats, and it seems that like the world in general has become a much safer place. Even though, you know, in certain communities things are changing, you do have to lock your doors. And also, you know, petty crimes may also be on the rise, especially with just the way that the economy is. But as far as like, you know,
but you're talking crime stats from let's say the 80s and 90s forward. What about like the 60s or 50s or 40s or 30s or 20s?
I think also that it does show that crime stats are actually lower today than ever in history, even since the 60s. Even since the 40s, 50s, you know.
And you're talking about world crime, huh?
World crime.
So that means they redistributed the crime into America because America didn't seem to have such a crazy
Well-
crime pre-60s, pre-70s, 80s, 90s.
You could say that. I don't know the statistics on America specifically, but I don't know if it's necessarily a redistribution because if it's worldwide stats and it's still like lesser, then it's still lesser, right? So.
But
Yeah.
I have a feeling in many cases we have corrupt people in office maybe more today than back then, at least in America, because there's a lot of cooking of the books on crime and all kinds of stuff. But I want to move into the anti-Semitism thing because you mentioned that and white replacement theory that you brought up. Are you able to, how are you on time? Are you able to hold over for another 20,
Yeah.
30, 40,
Yeah,
50
of
minutes?
course.
Take calls?
Yeah.
Okay.
Certainly.
I want to take a 5-minute break then, Stardust and viewers. Let's play a song, guys. It's Work Hard Wednesday, and the hard-working Jason Martin from Starflyer 59, trucker extraordinaire, Give Up the War by Starflyer 59 from the 2001 album Leave Here a Stranger. Hope you enjoy it, guys. You can call in 1-888-775-3773. Gonna get to your super chats. I see them. I appreciate them, guys. And we'll be back with Stardust in a minute. Starflyer 59.
I read what they write. God's men left before. It's simply that I'm still afraid
We just have to put up with the bad audio. Thanks for trying, Bill and Nick. American Anger, baby. The good thing is Stardust sounds great. Just Hake and Hake's music are bad. Yes, I will be taking calls. Call in. This is a Christian song, guys. He wanted to be someone like Paul. Well, thank you guys for bearing with me through the beautiful music. My opinion, beautiful. Stardust, are you there? Is she unmuted?
Yes, hi.
Okay, cool. And I assume that people can hear you. I want to read some super chats and you can address them along with me, Stardust. Greenwall gave a diamond saying, Israel has enslaved the USA. Why not discuss that? Do you know what he's talking about, Stardust?
I'm not quite sure. But I guess I would be interested to hear what he's talking about. So
I know what
yeah.
Greenwall is about. I think that I know what a lot of guys say, that we get involved in foreign wars on behalf of Israel or something like that. Like Israel wants us to go to war with Iran, which I'm not a fan of that idea. And I don't know if that's true. I know that Netanyahu is very concerned about Iran. But
I think they are, but I don't know that there's. I would have to see evidence for like Israel wanting us to like go to war for them.
What about in the past, like with the Middle East? Was Iraq, was Afghanistan, were those in any way due to Israel?
I think those were more of our doing, honestly. That was more of our politicians wanting to go in there and getting us to go in there.
9/11,
from what I can tell.
Was 9/11 a result of us supporting Israel or being involved in the Middle East for Israel or anything like that?
It may have been a result of us being involved in the Middle East, but I don't think it was related to Israel.
I know that there are a lot of, they say that there are a lot of dual citizens, Israeli American people on both sides of the aisle, Republican and Democrat, in office and in bureaucracy. You know, Blinken, I think somebody said that Blinken is an Israeli citizen and American citizen, and a lot of these guys in the Biden administration. People say that that's corrupt, that we shouldn't have dual citizens in our government.
I don't necessarily agree. I think if somebody lives and works in America and they spend all of their time in America, I think probably their values are going to be American. Probably their priorities are going to be for America. I don't know. That's just my opinion, though. So.
I did notice amongst both sides of the aisle, the Jewish people on both sides of the aisle tended not to like Trump as much as, let's say, the Christians or the normal, like, atheist whites. I don't know about the atheists, but just the ordinary Americans tended more to be pro-Trump than, at least at first, than the Jewish, even conservatives. Like, Ben Shapiro was pretty anti-Trump for quite a long time, and he's kind of iffy on him. Dennis Prager was anybody but Trump at first, and then he started to like him. So
I don't know that it's, I'm not really sure that it has to do with anything of people, like, whether they're Jewish or not. I think a lot of conservatives were initially not a fan of Trump. Like a lot of conservatives thought that Trump was a joke to begin with, but then as he became more serious of a candidate, they got on board.
I think what I notice about Jewish people is oftentimes they're intellectuals, and Trump was a simple-minded man. His message was simple, straightforward, big picture. This is how I see reality. This is what the truth is, big picture. And a lot of intellectuals sort of nitpick on details, saying, well, actually, this is also the case. This is also the case, and you need to account for like the exceptions. And he's just talking about big picture. What? Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. But Ivanka converted to Judaism, and her husband is Jewish, right? So,
yeah, and they were a more like liberal intellectual influence on him. Like he's more a law and order guy, but Ivanka got him to let some of the people out of prison early, and it was sort of a more nicey mama spirit type thing. Oh, have mercy on them. And there's a place for having mercy, of course. I'm not saying that there's no place for it, but they're definitely not him. And I don't know if they would have supported him had he not been family. And so like he loves them, you know? And he does see the value in like they have some natural leadership skills, seemingly. Jared Kushner was a successful businessman, I think, on his own, or successful in some way on his own in the world. But they were definitely not in line with the big picture Trump, tough on immigration, tough on crime thing.
Yeah. But I mean, also how much of that is like, nobody's going to be aligned 100% on everything, right? At the end of the day, like Ivanka was still probably Trump, of his family members, probably Trump's biggest strength, right? Because she was such an excellent speaker. She carried herself in such a excellent way. She just PR wise, like was a force of her own, honestly, right?
I liked
yeah.
She carried herself well. I didn't like her values or seeming policies. I mean, I don't know the specifics of the people whom she let out of prison, but there was this First Step Act that has had some mixed results because some of these people who were let out on the First Step Act have gone on to commit crimes and even murders, I think, according to like reporting from Tucker Carlson back when he was on Fox News. So I think that Trump was.
Know anything
I think Trump was his own biggest strength because he was just real in himself, and what you see is what you get, unless you just don't see a lot of people just didn't see the realness of him. But I think he was his greatest strength.
Well, I won't deny that, right? He is very charismatic, but I was just saying, like, of his family members, I think Ivanka was probably one of his biggest, smoothing over people, right? She was really good at smoothing over things with him and people who, like, virulently disagreed with him and would never compromise with him. And so, like, I don't know, like, necessarily, maybe the Jewish community in general tends to skew more liberal.
That's for sure.
But I don't know that necessarily is evidence of anything like a conspiracy or anything like that, So or even slavery, So
I have to beg to differ on Trump smooths things over on himself because a lot of these people, they were so bristled by his public persona of just speaking out and hitting back really toughly with them. Mm-hmm. When he was in person with them, he was reasonable. They would remark, multiple people would remark that he would listen. Dr. Ben Carson, the black brain surgeon who became the Secretary of HUD, he said Trump really listens. So he's more a man of humility than people may realize. Even Joe Biden got a amazingly gracious letter from Trump for the transition, when the transition of power happened between Trump to Biden. Trump left him a letter that Biden described as amazingly gracious. So I think that he smoothed things over for himself more than Ivanka. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm not denigrating Ivanka. I'm just saying that he was he's like perfect for the presidency, in my opinion.
Well, yeah, I won't deny that. Again, he's a very charismatic guy. He's funny. Even if I disagree with him, and I didn't support Trump ever, I couldn't deny that he's a very charismatic guy. He's very funny. So yeah, he is his own biggest strength. But I was just saying that, you know, Ivanka did serve her purpose as well for him.
I will get back to the super chats, but I want to. Okay, there's another super chat along these lines, and I want to address this anti-Semitism thing since we're on the topic. Spoiler alert, bought a coffee saying large parts of culture derive from race, he says. So he's saying that, well, that he's saying just what he said. Large parts of culture derive from race. So he's saying bringing in other races into America is going to change the culture, even if they assimilate to some degree into American culture.
So there have been like historical, you know, modern immigration isn't the only time that we've had seen immigration, right? Like historically, there have been mass immigration, you know, and things have turned out all right. As far as like the idea that like that parts of culture derive from race, in a sense, that might be true, in that, like, if a certain race of people reside in one area and there is a culture in that area, then generally the people in that area are going to hold those cultural beliefs. But at the same time, you know, we can see that, again, like, that I think there are studies to back this up, that when people immigrate to different countries, it only takes like a generation or two for their offspring to fully integrate with the country's actual values and cultural practices. So I understand what this person is saying, that like, yes, if certain, like, for example, if certain people come from a specific region, they are going to have the beliefs of the culture in that region. But at the same time, you know, again, people do adapt. So.
You know, you've brought up a couple of times that it takes 2 or 3 generations for a people to fully assimilate into the culture that they're living in, or, for example, America. I noticed that, and I've heard that some of the Muslim people who've come into America, they come in and are compliant, and are, you know, they are appreciative of the country. But then their children sometimes grow up to be like terrorists. Omar Mateen, the guy who shot up the Pulse nightclub. Some of the Jihadi John, I think, was a British guy who he did the ISIS beheading videos. He was born and raised, I think, in England or UK anyway.
Yeah.
And he was a second generation. Yeah. So there's like resentment that can crop back up, that like the parents don't sometimes fail the children, of course. It's like quite common.
So yeah, it does happen. Generally these are like fringer cases,
right? But
they're really unfortunate. And you know, there are a couple of things that probably play into this, right? Like the whole extremism problem within Islam is basically Wahhabism is a more extreme like school of thought within Islam, and that has become immensely popular throughout the Middle East and just throughout the world in general in recent decades. But it in itself is still like a reformist movement, so it is like a newer school of thought. I do think part of the reason we see people, you know, becoming extremists is because of the exporting of that ideology. I think also part of it is, you know, when people feel, I think, you know, some of it is mental illness, for sure. And, you know, people need to seek mental help. But also some of it is probably mental illness paired with like what they feel is you know, ostracization, feeling like they've been othered or things like that. But for what it's worth, the Muslim community that I kind of know has been pretty integrated with American values. And generally, I've seen I remember when I was younger, there were these parents, and their son started getting much more religious than they ever were, and they were concerned. So, I think that
They were concerned about him becoming extreme with it.
Yeah, they were like, why are you becoming so religious? We never raised you this way.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I think these do have checks and balances, right? But and there are always going to be fringe cases. So yeah, it's hard. Yeah.
Are you more liberal than your parents?
I think in some ways, actually, that my mom is a little bit more liberal than I am, actually. So, and she, she's an immigrant, or she's a citizen of America.
Okay.
She's been a citizen for for decades, since for 50 years. But yeah, she's more liberal than I am in some ways. So. That's kind of interesting to me.
I asked because I grew up among a bunch of Hispanics and Asians, and the Mexican and Guatemalan and other parents and Salvadorian parents are oftentimes more conservative, and the Asian parents more conservative than the children who grew up here. They become Americanized, but in some of the, in my opinion, bad ways. They become more liberal, worldly, sex out of wedlock, promoting feminism and anti-racism and all that stuff. All these things that I don't support, that I don't feel are very American, or Christian or whatever.
What do you think is, I guess, not American about anti-racism?
America allows American values allows the freedom of speech, the freedom of free association. So people are allowed to be racist. And if people were allowed to be racist, we allow Black Americans to pretty much speak their minds, and there's no real recourse. And I like that. I like that about Black Americans speaking their minds. I want everybody to be able to speak their minds, because I think shaming people and brainwashing them to not to speak their minds on race, whether they're right or wrong, whether it's even if it's out of anger and hatred, it allows people to get it off their chest and hash it out, rather than Mama Spirit punishing this group of people, getting them fired.
Yeah, I'm not a big supporter of that. I will say, I am a liberal, but and my family is too. But generally, I think I have some conservative sensibilities, even if I am liberal. So, one thing I don't really support is getting people fired, things like that, right? But I guess what I would say is that, one thing I've noticed about you is that you're very anti-hatred, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's a really, really good thing. And I think the way that I look at people who are super anti-racist, I think they're just trying to kind of do the same thing that you are. Maybe it's not the same way, but they're trying to, I guess, educate people and get there to be less hatefulness in the society, right? And that's just kind of how I view it,
It's nice, but this brings me to the anti-Semitism thing and the Islamophobia stuff. I feel, and racism and all that. I feel that I don't call it anti-Semitic. When you call it anti-Semitism, by the way, do you use a hyphen or do you use no hyphen for the anti-Semitism?
I don't use a hyphen. I don't think. I think I've used both, but I think I decided to just not use the hyphen.
Because the trend now is to use no hyphen, and I read the justification for it, I think it makes it seem more official, like it's a real thing. And I don't think that this is, I find these specific supposed types of hatred, because sometimes people call it anti-Semitic or Islamophobic or racist when somebody is simply giving a valid criticism. Maybe they're making a general statement that one bristles at, and maybe it's an unfair general statement, but sometimes it's quite fair general statement. And it's called hatred when it's actually not hatred. If you just call it hatred, then you can't hate the hate. You can't hate the racist. You can't hate the Nazi. You can't hate the anti-Semite. But it gives the victim group false justification to hate the oppressor group. You know, the blamed group, the whites, the racists, the anti-Semites, whoever.
I'm trying to kind of like understand what you're saying here. I guess for me, you know, these are all things that fall under the umbrella of hatred, or
Right.
sometimes they're not even hatred, right?
Right.
Some of these things are just people inadvertently, you know, saying things that are, you know, kind of bigoted, right? Kind of like hateful, but they don't realize it. And so, you know, sometimes you want to, for example, like if somebody says something that I perceive as like, that's not necessarily true and it has some pretty bad implications, it probably, for me to say like, hey, what you just said is really hateful, is probably going to come off like, I don't know. In my head, it's probably going to come off much more severe than if I say, hey, what you just said is a bit like anti-Semitic, rather than a bit hateful, you know? But I don't know. I guess it really depends on perspective, because if I say it's like a bit anti-Semitic, what you just said, I'm not like calling that person themselves an anti-Semite, or I'm not calling them anti-Semitic. I think there are a lot of people who will say and do things inadvertently that are, you know, bigoted or prejudiced, or, you know, things that, you know, carry hate behind them and not even realize it. And I don't want to call that person hateful, right? So, yeah.
But what they're saying is either true or false, or in the direction, on the right track, or off track. It doesn't.
Sure, there's some times where people will accuse people of being bigoted when they're really not, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, that there certainly is that as well.
Because when you call something anti-Semitic, then you can information isn't necessarily, or a position isn't necessarily against the Jews just because you say, oh, most Jews are liberal, or I don't like their influence in America. Like, it doesn't mean that you are, just because other people who have this hatred for the Jews say this complaint about the Jews, doesn't mean that the person who doesn't have a hatred for them, or whether they have the hatred or not, doesn't mean that their criticism is not valid. Like, it's still, so often we'll hear about when whites bring up black on white violence. There's factual information that they're bringing up. And if they're bringing it up to justify hating the blacks, then that's not right. But if they're bringing this up to address the issue, then it's perfectly right and we should address it.
Yeah, I guess it just really depends. Like, if you're trying to address like an actual issue, then I think anybody would agree with that. But I think the issue is that we see a lot of people will see people bringing these things up, and they will say that they're bringing it up to address the issue, but really they're doing it to either like invalidate an issue that somebody's going through, or they're doing it to perpetuate bigotry, right?
Sometimes,
so it's really hard to tell. You know? It can be really hard to tell.
I'll tell you one thing, like the black crime, the disproportionate crime from the blacks community is gives broader context to their problems with the police. You know, that's doesn't necessarily invalidate that There's mistreatment on both sides between blacks and police. But it gives you context to explain, oh, that is why. It's not just because the cops are simply racist. It's not because the courts are racist. It's because of a cultural issue has been corrupted among the black Americans themselves with this, well, in my opinion, because of the victim mindset and because of the single mothers. And they're encouraged, they're the group that is encouraged the most to be angry out of all of the races in America. And that's been a disservice to them. So that's why I say that this racism thing and anti-Semitism thing is justifying the Jewish people, the Muslim people in the case of Islamophobia, and the black people and the women for sexism, to feel like victims, which has been a disservice to them. It just makes them from victims into perpetrators. Like they're hateful and resentful of being victims. So that's why I don't like these terms. Go ahead.
In some sense, I agree with you, because I do think that there's an issue where a lot of people keep framing things within the victim versus oppressor mindset. I definitely agree with you on that. I guess the thing that I would say is that it's like, it is a complex issue, right? Because again, like you will maybe be bringing up you know, the brutality in a specific case of police brutality, right? And then somebody will bring up, well, you know, this community commits more crime than all other communities. And it's like, yeah, that's true. But like in this case, this specific case, it's probably not like super helpful, right? Like if it's like in an example where like somebody's beaten to death or something like that, right?
Yeah.
So
you and I have talked about and I differ with the notion of police brutality. I don't want to get too far off track, and I want to come back to your video. But this kind of feeds into the victim thing. Like the police brutality notion is, I like the term unnecessary roughness. Well, like, or maybe excessive force, because in the case of Tyree Nichols, the black young man who was beaten to death allegedly by like the 5 black cops in Memphis, I guess, or somewhere in Tennessee. That was unnecessary roughness. That may even have been quite brutal.
I think that was brutality.
Yeah.
I think that was police brutality.
But I don't call it police brutality. I just call it human being brutality, because in the black community, the blacks are brutal with one another. And you and I disagree on the Derek Chauvin, George Floyd thing. I don't know if you would call that brutality, but I definitely don't. Would you call that brutality? Derek Chauvin's knee on, and the police kneeling on him?
See, I don't think that there was a reason for him to be on his neck for 9 minutes. You know, I don't see a reason for that. I think like when somebody's in your custody, you do have a responsibility for their health. You know, that's just kind of the way it is, right? If they're in your custody, they have no ability to keep track of their health. You're the one who's like keeping custody of them. You become their guardian, and you do become responsible for their health. So kneeling on somebody's neck for 9 minutes, like, it just seems like excessive. Seems like you are putting them at medical risk. And regardless of like, you know, the autopsy results, like, you know, things are exacerbated by that type of stress, right? That type of stress will cause a lot of things to exacerbate. So,
you know, I finally watched the video. Like I hadn't all this time, I had never watched the video. So I made myself watch it, and when I had only seen clips, and I heard the black young man who was an onlooker saying, "He is human, bro," and you know, like, get him off. And I remember it looking kind of off for him to be on. I don't know if it was really the neck or the neck/shoulder blade area. I heard that he said that he got on him like that because he said that he had COVID. George Floyd said that he had the China virus, and so he didn't want to get breathed on or something. And I could see the last 2 or 3 minutes, it looked like, okay, you guys should, he seems unresponsive and out. He seems either knocked out or dead. And so I'm like, okay, maybe they should get off at that point. But I don't blame them really, because I tend to disagree that they're responsible for the person's health. They're not like a babysitter. They're law enforcement, you know? And I don't want to rehash this too much, but I saw the video, and this guy who was saying, oh, he is human, bro. He's calling them bums. He's getting off the sidewalk, and this other, this white female fireman says, oh, he's not breathing. Let me come check his pulse. And this Asian officer is saying, trying to hold the peanut gallery back. And if anything, these people didn't help the situation, because they were directing attention away from George Floyd to the onlookers who seemed like they were going to interfere with police work. Whereas had they been allowed to pay attention to George Floyd, they might have gotten off of him. And I know that you made the argument when we debated this a couple of debates ago that police officers are supposed to handle all of this situation perfectly. But I still don't see that as, okay, brutality. Was that brutality, or was it unnecessary roughness, maybe? Because I could maybe...
I mean, at the very least, it's like negligence, right? Like, I understand that you don't believe that that police officers should be responsible for somebody's health. Just in my opinion, as soon as you take somebody into custody, as soon as they have no ability to take care of their own health, and in that situation, I would say that very clearly he, you know, whether he was kneeling on, you know, his neck or his shoulder blade or whatever, that's still a situation where George Floyd himself is not able to care for his own health. He does not have the ability to do that. It is in the responsibility. Well, it is in the responsibility of a police officer, as soon as you take somebody into custody, to monitor their health. You know, make sure, if you are putting this type of force on them, to make sure that this force is not exacerbating pre-existing health conditions. If a patient, for example, dies under the care of a nurse or a doctor, right, even if that is not induced by the doctor, they're still going to be held responsible. There's still going to be an investigation into that. So I don't see, if we have the standard for medical professionals, even for things that they themselves did not create, for pre-existing health conditions that they themselves did not create, or they themselves are not currently treating, you know, we hold medical professionals to that standard. I don't see why we wouldn't hold police officers to that standard. I
understand lawsuits coming from that, maybe. Yeah. I still think that I don't understand a murder, life in prison, federal charges of violating the civil rights stuff. I think it's way, way, way overblown. But
well, I mean, at the very least, they should have had medical professionals there very, very quickly, in my opinion.
It was relatively quick. Like, they came like the 9 minutes ended because the medic showed up. So the medic showed up within 10 minutes of, and it wasn't clear that he was that out of it. I mean, it was clear he was maybe overdosing. But
to me, it looked like he was very clearly not in a good state of mind. He seemed to me that he was very clearly, like, he was paranoid, and you know, he
did you see
he was not acting?
Did you see the part leading up to it where he dove through the car? Like, they finally got him into the car. And then he got out the other side. And then he said,
well, yeah, he was very, very anxious. He was very paranoid. He was very anxious. He was not in a normal state of mind. But even then, like, I still think that, like, putting that, you know, amount of pressure on him is going to exacerbate anything else going on. And, you know, when somebody's in your custody, you have to be responsible for them.
I have a caller who wants to comment on this police brutality thing. Maze is my favorite caller from Dayton, Ohio. Maze, you are go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I just want to add one thing. Like, you know, I am sympathetic to police officers. It's not an easy job, you know, and there are a lot of responsibilities with that job. And, you know, I'm not somebody who's like defund the police. If anything, I think that there should be more funding into the police so that they can get help with things like this, right? But yeah, when somebody's in your custody, I do think that you are, responsible for their health.
All right. Maze in Dayton, Ohio. Are you there?
Yes, I am.
You are live. Can you turn her up? Stay close to your phone, Maze. Close,
Can you hear me
close.
now?
I think so. Can you hear Maze? Go ahead.
I think so. She's a little bit quiet
Yeah.
to me. So.
Crank her up if you can, Hasan.
I'm still quiet. I have 3 questions.
All right.
When it comes to police brutality, it seems like some people are happy when you see the cops. They're supposed to protect and serve, not kill and then deny people, regardless of whoever it is. And then we sit, and why do y'all take the evening news that a group of people that they constantly show every day, day in and day out, and if you're a young person, you're going to look at every black person as a criminal, and that's what you agree with James on, right?
Say again?
And I'm speaking for people of color. I'm speaking for colored people. So if you sit there and see that every day, but you don't see what you're doing, you're going to think you're the greatest person on the earth. But if they focus on everybody, don't you think this world would be different and you would look at people differently? Or you look at them the same?
Do you follow her question? I got lost.
So I think I don't know if I'm understanding the question correctly, but just correct me if I'm wrong. So what I'm picking up from what Maze is saying here is that because of the reporting, there is bias reporting in the media, and it tends to portray people of color in a certain light that is negative. Do you think if the media reported more on crimes committed by white people, I guess, that
No,
there would
everybody.
be a... Oh, everybody. Okay.
Yes, everybody's crime. They only focus on the black community. That's why you all,
Yeah.
the James and young people, that's what you see. But if you're not around
Yeah.
those people, you don't know what they're doing, and you can't speak for those people.
Yeah,
Okay.
no,
Just like
I
you got
agree
one
with
black
that.
person
I
speaking
agree with
against
that.
them, everybody don't look that and see that the same. But we know the news is happening, but it's not being reported every day. 'Cause
Okay,
what we see on it.
but Maze,
Okay.
the mainstream media tends to downplay black violent crime. They downplay
they
the
don't.
fact that it's from the blacks.
Every day, everywhere you look, it's about, on every channel, in every state, it's
Because
about a black person.
because it is very out of control in the black
No, it's
community.
not. Everybody's community is out of control.
I
That's what y'all
don't differ with you on that, but it's
Well, then what are you talking about?
but it's way more disproportionate
No, it's
from
not.
black Americans.
No, it's not. To you, it is. I don't think it's a disproportionate out of control.
Yeah.
Because if you sit there and watch that Senate yesterday and what was going on in that White House yesterday, they was about to fight.
Yeah, I know that was
You know, when you talk
ridiculous.
about crime in the
That was
community,
wild, yeah.
It
Yeah.
was wild. If we didn't see it, it would never been
Yeah.
reported. So if we sit and
Yeah.
watch it every day, they show you, somebody look like you or her, every day on the news, that's what you're going to think, that all white people are bad people.
Whatever.
And I know
Maze.
they do bad things, but I don't
certainly-
look at them
yeah.
as a group to see that they're bad.
Yeah.
So that's where it comes when it comes to the
certainly-
youngest and you and agreeing. And when the cops beat up
Yeah.
somebody, that's why they went to jail, because they broke the law. And then you got some people that was happy that they did it. Some didn't like that they
Yeah.
did it, but they went to jail, so they broke the law. That's why they are in
Yeah.
jail, and some people don't think they should be there.
Now, Maze,
Yeah,
go ahead, Stardust.
Yeah, I tend to agree that, like, I don't think an entire group is bad, right? Just because of like the crime reports that come out of it, right? Even if there was like a disproportionate amount of like violence that came out of a certain community, I would look at the reasons for why that happens, right? If you look at any poverty-stricken community, you will see a much more likelihood for people who are poor to commit violence because they are in a desperate situation, right? Just similarly, if you see things like with health outcomes, right? Like people who live again
right when
in
it comes to
poverty. Yeah.
Everything bad is
Yeah.
toward black people, and that's not true either.
What's
It comes
that?
to diseases is black people. Everything come out, and then y'all grow up thinking that. So y'all need to get that out of y'all.
I'm
psyche,
not thinking
you know.
that blacks are carrying
Let
all
me tell
these
you for an
diseases.
example. Let me say, black people can't have anything because if you get a BET or if you get a TV station, the one where you want to put your news, there's somebody out there going to get jealous of it and they don't want it to happen. Why do you have to have this? Somebody got to tell our news.
Oh, Lord. Go ahead,
Don't they?
Stardust.
I mean,
respond.
in the correct way,
if you
not
have
in the
something.
way that you all want to do it. So do you think everybody don't like black people? James, guess. 'Cause every black-
Her name is Stardust, Maze.
Oh, me Stardust. Do you think people don't like black people?
I think that there's a lot of bias against black people. Absolutely.
Is
In
it
the media.
necessary?
No, it's not.
Thank
no,
you.
I
That's
don't think
what I
so.
am.
But
That's what I'm
we have to
asking.
look at, just like what Stardust said about the crime in the black community, we have to look at the reasons for the bias against the black community.
And why is that, James?
Because black Americans bring it on themselves because they act
Really?
differently. They act
I
with an
don't know if it's
attitude. Go ahead.
That's your
I don't
TV.
know if they
That's what
bring
you
it
get off
on
the TV, off the
themselves.
Bluetooth. to take that way.
Yeah, so I don't agree that they bring it on themselves. I do think that there has been
put there.
history.
Yeah, there's no, it has nothing to do with history. It's put there because when they brought drugs into the community, they did not put those people there. Island North them did it. When they brought the guns into the community, Island North them put them there. They
Oliver
did not
North?
have those. It was a peaceful community until then. And then if we want to go on back into history to the Black Wall Street, where people were doing that on their own thing, they don't want to talk about that. And then every time they try to get it back, somebody in the waste is destroyed.
What I was going to say
every
about
black person don't
history,
need no Caucasian to help them, Israeli to help them get where they're going, because they can get there without them, with their own people. So that's what's in the way of stopping people from and redlining and all of the stuff that's happening in America today.
Yeah.
If they move out the way and leave them alone, they can I mean, just like the man that's doing the water out of air. They don't want him to he can make helping people survive. They don't want him to do that. And then you got James over here saying what black people can't do and they don't know how to do anything.
Huh?
Really?
I never said that.
Really?
What I
you
will
never
say
talk
is
about
that
the things that they do is like they in need and begging. We don't beg for nothing except for you to get out of the way so we can have our own.
Yeah,
What's
but
wrong
you
with
guys
having their own?
vote for Democrats for more
No, I don't vote for
socialism.
Democrats.
Get free
Just
stuff.
like I say, I'm not a Republican.
Well, Democrats
I'm
are
not
not
a
really
Democrat. I'm not a
socialists,
liberal.
so.
I am a human being.
But they are for like handouts.
And I sit back and I deal with all kind of people. And when the young people see what they, then the first thing they do, black crime. What about Caucasian crime? What about Asian crime? All the crime itself, you want to just do it on
I'm not for that either. But
yes, you are. You repeat it all the time.
I'm not for a white crime. I don't like whites committing
You
crime.
don't want to talk about it.
If
it was
I
sitting
can,
if it
I
was
just
put in your
wanted
face
to-
every day, that's what everybody look at you the same way, unless you ill to understand. And the crime
I just
today,
wanted
I
to
still don't
say
look at all people that
when
way.
I bring up history, I'm not bringing up history of like I'm talking about like, okay, so the reason for, even if you do see like more crime within specific communities, again, you look at history of like redlining, you look at the history of like what kind of communities have poor people been living in, right? What kind has there been environmental pollution in those communities? Has there been lead poisoning in those communities? And yes, there has been, and that will inevitably, combined with the desperation that poverty brings, the desperation that redlining and discrimination and poverty and all of these different things together, combined with these environmental pollutants and things like that, will lead to these outcomes with crime, right? And so I think we do have a duty as Americans to like try to lift each other up. Right now, I'm not saying that we don't hold ourselves accountable. Obviously, we should, but I think that we need to be like considerate. Like Hake says, he's all against hate, right? And I'm all against hate as well. And for me, combating hate is trying to lift other people up. Trying to lift other Americans up.
It's not lifting them; it's trying to get out of the way and stop sitting and saying they're begging. Which they're not, because they pay taxes. We pay taxes just like everybody else do. But when it comes to the things that we do, we don't hear. But when it comes to crime, we are the front page. So somebody needs to take it off the front page and either put everybody on the front page.
Are you on the front page, Maze?
No, I'm not.
Then how are you saying we?
When you say black people, you're talking about my people.
No, I'm not. I'm not talking about black people.
What do you say?
I'm talking about the black people who are into that like that.
Because you got those that don't over yours, but you don't talk about them. So what life are they in?
Yeah, I do.
What life are they in? And you go to wonderful whites of West Virginia, they live the same way.
I differ with you guys. I don't think poverty causes crime. I think or leads to crime and all that thing. I don't think it's desperation causing these people to get into this mess.
What causes people to get into do stuff like that?
Poor raising.
Really?
I think the poor raising, the lack of morality leads them into being. And responsibility leads them into being both poor and criminal
couldn't that be for anybody?
among the different people. And when you have more crime, then there's, of course, going to be more poverty because the businesses don't want to do business in an area that's high crime.
Well, so criminals too. I don't understand that business, but you can't.
I think the lack of morality causes both the so-called poverty and the crime.
But see, James, you can own things that other people can't own. And her family can own things that other people
So
can't.
what? That doesn't make
You should get out of the way and let everybody else own and let them do their own thing. If they did, you wouldn't have the same problem that you were discussing.
Then you agree with me that they shouldn't be on welfare. We should
more of you on welfare than black people are.
not proportionally though.
No, really, we ain't talking about proportion.
But you're changing the subject when you're saying whites do it too.
I'm asking you the question.
What
So your people are on the system too.
I know, and they're not even those even the whites who are even the whites who are on welfare aren't committing the crime levels that the blacks are.
James, I do not agree with giving corporations money either. Not my tax dollars, but they do it.
You're changing the subject. One wrong doesn't justify another.
That's welfare.
I agree. Let's defund the corporations.
Defund them and defund a whole lot of stuff and let everybody else have the opportunity.
Defund it.
You keep people out and say
defund them
they're
all.
big. You keep them out and say they're big, and they're not big.
And I disagree with you too, Maze. And then we'll have to get back to my guest. I disagree with you too on protect and serve. Okay, but police are not supposed to protect and serve. That's
what are they supposed to do?
They're supposed to enforce the law.
Enforce the law?
Yes.
But most of them break the law.
Protect and serve is a cute saying. That's just
enforcing the law?
That's just to sound nice. But they're supposed to enforce the law.
That's the oath that they take.
Yeah, that's a fake oath.
If medical professionals are held to this standard that
they don't go to jail.
There's an investigation. They do. They go to jail. If a patient dies under their care, and it's under their care. Let's say they just did a surgery, and even if that the cause of death is different from what the doctor was working on, there's at the very least going to be an investigation on it. So.
Right, but they don't have a peanut gallery saying, "Oh, let me do this. I know your job better than you. You're a bum." They don't have all this mess.
I would say that they do. I would say medicine is one of the most regulated industries in America.
That's true. That's a pain. And that's what's causing it to go out of control cost-wise. Yeah. Last question for Stardust. Go ahead, Maze.
That's welfare, too, the medical professionals.
Yeah.
Medication. But this anti-Semitic, when we get to that, what is anti-Semitic?
So anti-Semitic, what I am concerned about when I talk about anti-Semitic, anti-Semitism, I'm worried about rhetoric that leads to eventual violence, right? And there has been a 400% increase in anti-Semitic hate crimes in the past month. So
per ADL, right?
I don't know who published the stats. It might have been the ADL. I'm not sure. Yeah.
Okay.
So. Yeah.
I know. I don't doubt that because hatred increases anytime that there's a controversial news buzz like this, and so the people taking sides are going to hate each other. So I wouldn't be surprised about that.
That's not what I'm saying. And when you say anti-Semitic, or we'll say Kanye, or we'll say the young lady that wrote her opinion on something, they wanted to punish her and not give her the job. So then they wanted to take Kanye's life away because of something he said. Why you can't listen to what people got to say and not be anti-Semitic? Or you might be anti-Semitic yourself.
Maze,
when it comes to certain people.
Okay, so she's for the freedom of speech thing. You know what, Maze?
Yeah.
30 seconds, respond to her, and then I got to move on, Maze. Go ahead.
Okay. I would say I'm not for people losing their jobs, but I do think that so I'm not for people losing their jobs, and I'm not sure that I agree with banks pulling services, right? But what I would say is freedom of speech, doesn't mean that there aren't, it's freedom of consequences, right? So if you do say things that are perceived as anti-Semitic, like the way that Kanye really went on, and I think Kanye was not fully in his own mind, but there are going to be repercussions to that, right? People will see that kind of behavior. They won't want to be associated. If they run a company with this person, they might not want their company associated with that type of language or that type of hatred, right? So,
Maze, I can't. I gotta go, Maze.
Okay, I'm leaving, but I have to leave her with this. If you do citizenship and you live in this country, follow this country's rule and not some other one.
All right. Very nice. All right, bye. Stardust, I got to wrap up these super chats. I appreciate you coming on.
Thank you for having me.
I loved Hasan Piker's statement that he said in your video. I'm just a dumb idiot with a Twitch stream.
Yeah.
That's how I
a
feel
good one.
about myself.
That's how I feel about myself too. Honestly, I'm not an expert on any of this stuff. You know, again, I'm not an expert on any of this. I just felt really really kind of disappointed in the way that people were acting immediately after a terror attack. So
I think that we can only set an example ourselves or just check ourselves. Like you said, when you at the end of your video, spoiler alert, not my mod, but at the end of your video, you had a great quote. When you dehumanize others, they in turn dehumanize you. And so that's why I say we just got to watch ourselves, whatever side we're on.
Yeah, I agree with that.
This last super chats, that handyman says of George Floyd, he took control of his health by taking fentanyl before being in police custody. So who's responsible? The overdose from his own choice or the cop who didn't know he took that much fetty? He asks.
I think that, again, you know, the police officer, I think to anybody looking at George Floyd, could see that he wasn't in his right mind. There was something else going on. And I think that, you know, keeping that in mind, you still have to use, like, you know, not use disproportionate force on people, right? So I just don't understand the need for him to have been kneeling on him for that long, and for you know, them to not have called medical services sooner. I think that probably medical services should have been called sooner. I just you know, as soon as he's freaking out, really, this person does not seem like they are in their right state of mind. They really don't. So you know, as soon as somebody's in your custody, they do not, you know, he may have taken drugs before that, but as soon as they're in your custody, they don't have the ability to care for themselves. And you have assumed that responsibility for them. So that's just my opinion, though.
Spoiler alert, bought a coffee. The entire George Floyd incident was a hoax designed to mock Christ's sacrifice, stoke people for the 2020 election, and get another non-white federal holiday, Juneteenth, planned eventually to replace the 4th of July. Reminder, George Floyd called out for mama, whereas Jesus called to his father. Satanic inversion, typical. Had you heard that take before?
I've not heard that take, but it's definitely interesting. So
nice. Nugget Man says, typical libtard tactics. Bring up an argument, point, says, right, and move on to another point. He's criticizing you, Stardust. No, discrimination is based, and we should segregate based on race, ethnicity, and religion, says Nugget Man with a coffee.
Well, Nugget Man, I am glad that you were not determining the laws for this country. So I will say that much. I'm sorry that I say right a lot. It's just I'm trying to improve the way that I speak. Okay, taking time.
Carver bought a coffee. Oh Lord, Carver, does this count as a date? Ask her if she likes Christian punk rock. No, I don't. Do you like Christian punk rock?
I don't mind any type of music really, except for new age music. I think, and even in new age music, like Enya's decent, right?
Nice.
But I feel, you know, like there are specific. I feel like, you know, people make some really lazy music within the new age genre. That's probably my biggest critique. If I was going to critique a musical genre, that would be it. So
okay. Yeah. Last quick point from you about this topic, white replacement theory. You brought up this thing in your video, white replacement theory, demographic change. The pro-Palestinian libs sound like the far right, you say. What's wrong with the notion that whites have been replaced in these white countries? Go ahead.
So the specific conspiracy theory that I'm talking about is the one where people allege that that Jewish people in high positions of power are purposely flooding the West with immigrants to like erode like white culture, which I don't think so. Are there immigrants coming to Western countries? Absolutely. And that should be like a testament to how successful our countries are, right? We are like, you know, the best economically. We are so prosperous. We have such great living conditions that people from other countries would rather immigrate and start new in a place that they don't know. Yes, it may be that like demographic change is happening, but it's not necessarily a bad thing, right? So yeah, that's what I would say.
Man,
So,
that's brutal.
and
All right, go ahead.
and well, I mean, like, look, I mean, the culture is still, culture can still be, the same, as long as people learn to integrate. So that's probably the key part here, right?
Well, Stardust, we're out of time. Nathan in Illinois, he wanted to comment on doctors going to jail, but I cannot get to you, man. Stardust, tell the people how to find you, and I appreciate you coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, Hake. I know we disagree on a lot, but I'm glad that we're able to have just such civil conversations while disagreeing with each other. I'm Stardust. I cover politics, news, drama. You can find me. All my links are links.fromstardust.net, or I'm on YouTube, Stardust streams on YouTube.
All right. Well, I appreciate you coming on.
Thank you
I'm
so
sure
much.
we'll talk again. Take care.
Yeah, thank you.
Guys, this has been the Hake Report. I gotta end. And hopefully we'll get my audio fixed for tomorrow. Adios, America. And enjoy. Listen to Hake News. Bye.
Don't take the bait. You know they are fake. Just stop and wait. You could see the hate. There's no debate. Listen to Hake News.